Hello, my friends, and welcome to a reading of Crowley's Magic in Theory and Practice off a webpage that has white font on a light gray background. I'm not going to read the introduction because it's just quotes, pretty as they may be. I'm just going to go to what I assume is Crowley's little "Hey everybody, about me" intro section because it's too good to skip. This book is for all. For every man, woman, and child. My former work has been misunderstood, and its scope limited by my use of technical terms. It has attracted only too many dilettanti and eccentrics, weaklings seeking in quote-unquote magic an escape from reality. I myself was first consciously drawn to the subject in this way, and it has repelled only too many scientific and practical minds, such as I most designed to influence. But magic is for all. I have written this book to help the banker, the pugilist, the biologist, the poet, the navy, the grocer, the factory girl, the mathematician, the stenographer, the golfer, the wife, the consul, and all the rest to fulfill themselves perfectly, each in his or own proper function. Let me explain in a few words how it came about that I blazoned the word magic upon the banner that I have borne before me all my life. Before I touched my teens, bad wording, I was already aware that I was the beast, whose number is 666. I did not understand in the least what that implied. It was a passionately ecstatic sense of identity. In my third year at Cambridge, I devoted myself consciously to the great work, understanding thereby the work of becoming a spiritual being, free from the constraints, accidents, and deceptions of material existence. I found myself at a loss for a name to designate my work, just as H.P. Blavatsky some years earlier. Theosophy, spiritualism, occultism, mysticism all involved undesirable connotations. I therefore chose the name Scientology. I'm just kidding. It's magic. I therefore chose the name magic as essentially the most sublime and actually the most discredited of all the available terms. I swore to rehabilitate magic, to identify it with my own career, and to compel mankind to respect, love, and trust that which they scorned, hated, and feared. I have kept my word. But the time has now come for me to carry my banner into the thick of the press of human life. I must make magic the essential factor in the life of all. In presenting this book to the world, I must then explain and justify my position by formulating a definition of magic and setting forth its main principles in such a way that all may understand instantly that their souls, their lives, and every relation with every other human being in every circumstance depend upon magic, and the right comprehension and right application thereof. 1. Definition. Magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. Illustration. It is my will to inform the world of certain facts within my knowledge. I therefore take quote-unquote magical weapons, pen, ink, and paper. I write quote-unquote incantations, these sentences, in the quote-unquote magical language, i.e. that which is understood by the people I wish to instruct. I call forth quote-unquote spirits, such as printers, publishers, booksellers, and so forth, and constrain them to convey my message to those people. The composition and distribution of this book is thus an act of magic, by which I cause changes to take place in conformity with my will. In one sense, magic may be defined as the name given to science by the vulgar. 2. Postulate. Any required change may be effected by the application of the proper kind and degree of force, capital force, in the proper manner, through the proper medium, to the proper object. Illustration. I wish to prepare an ounce of chloride of gold. I must take the right kind of acid, nitrohydrochloric, and no other, in a vessel which will not break, leak, or corrode, in such a manner as will not produce undesirable results, with the necessary quantity of gold, and so forth. Every change has its own conditions. In the present state of our knowledge and power, some changes are not possible in practice. We cannot cause eclipses, for instance, or transform lead into tin, or create men from mushrooms, but it is theoretically possible to cause in any object any change of which that object is capable by nature, and the conditions are covered by the above postulate. 3. Theorems. 1. Every intentional act is a magical act. Illustration, see quote-unquote definition above. Small note in white font. By intentional, I mean willed, but even unintentional acts, so seeming, are not truly so. Thus, breathing is an act of the will to live. 2. Every successful act has conformed to the postulate. 3. Every failure proves that one or more requirements of the postulate have not been fulfilled. Illustrations. There may be a failure to understand the case, as when a doctor makes a wrong diagnosis and his treatment injures the patient. There may be a failure to apply the right kind of force, as when a rustic tries to blow out an electric light. There may be failure to apply the right degree of force, as when a wrestler has his hold broken. There may be a failure to apply the force in the right manner, as when one presents a check at the wrong window of the bank. There may be a failure to employ the correct medium, as when Leonardo da Vinci saw his masterpiece fade away. The force may be applied to an unsuitable object, as when one tries to crack a stone, thinking it a nut. 4. The first requisite for causing any change is through qualitative and quantitative understanding of the conditions. Illustration. The most common cause of failure in life is ignorance of one's own true will, or of the means to fulfill that will. A man may fancy himself a painter and waste his life trying to become one, or he may really be a painter and yet fail to understand and to measure the difficulties peculiar to that career. 5. The second requisite of causing any change is the practical ability to set in right motion the necessary forces. Illustration. A banker may have a perfect grasp of a given situation, yet lack the quality of decision or the assets necessary to take advantage of it. 6. This is a quote. Every man and every woman is a star. That is to say, every human being is intrinsically an independent individual with his own proper character and proper motion. 7. Every man and every woman has a course, depending partly on the self and partly on the environment, which is natural and necessary for each. Anyone who is forced from his own course, either through not understanding himself or through external opposition, comes into conflict with the order of the universe and suffers accordingly. Illustration. A man may think it is his duty to act a certain way, through having made a fancy picture of himself instead of investigating his actual nature. For example, a woman may make herself miserable for life by thinking that she prefers to love social consideration, or vice versa. One woman may stay with an unsympathetic husband when she would really be happy in an attic with a lover, while another may fool herself into a romantic elopement when her only pleasures are those of presiding over fashionable functions. Again, a boy's instinct may tell him to go to sea, while his parents insist on his becoming a doctor. In such a case, he will be both unsuccessful and unhappy in medicine. Crowley is pretty sexist. 8. A man whose conscious will is at odds with his true will is wasting his strength. He cannot hope to influence his environment efficiently. Illustration. When civil war rages in a nation, it is in no condition to undertake the invasion of other countries. A man with cancer employs his nourishment alike to his own use and to that of the enemy, which is part of himself. He soon fails to resist the pressure of his environment. In practical life, a man who is doing what his conscience tells him to be wrong will do it very clumsily at first. 9. A man who is doing his true will has the inertia of the universe to assist him. Illustration. The first principle of success in evolution is that the individual should be true to his own nature, and at the same time adapt himself to his environment. 10. Nature is a continuous phenomenon, though we may not know in all cases how things are connected. Illustration. Human consciousness depends on the properties of protoplasm. the existence of which depends on innumerable physical conditions peculiar to this planet, and this planet is determined by the mechanical balance of the whole universe of matter. We may say that our consciousness is casually connected with the remotest galaxies, yet we do not even know how it arises from or with the molecular changes in the brain. 11. Science enables us to take advantage of the continuity of nature by the empirical application of certain principles whose interplay involves different orders of idea connected with each other in a way beyond our present comprehension. Illustration. We are able to light cities by rule of thumb methods. We do not know what consciousness is or how it is connected with muscular action, what electricity is or how it is connected with the machines that generate it. And our methods depend on calculations involving mathematical ideas, which have no correspondence in the universe as we know it. For instance, irrational, unreal, and infinite expressions. 12. Man is ignorant of the nature of his own being and powers. Even his idea of his limitations is based on experience of the past, and every step in his progress extends his empire. There is therefore no reason to assign theoretical limits. Note, i.e., except, possibly, in the case of logically absurd questions, such as the schoolmen discussed in connection with God. That was just a note that interrupted the sentence. The sentence that went, there is therefore no reason to assign theoretical limits to what he may be or what he may do. Illustration. A generation ago, it was supposedly theoretically impossible that a man should ever know the composition of the fixed stars. It is known that our senses are adapted to receive only a fraction of the possible rates of vibration. Modern instruments have enabled us to detect some of these suprasensibilities by indirect methods, and even to use their peculiar qualities in the service of man, such as in the case of the rays of Hertz and Roentgen. Don't know what that last one. As Tyndall said, man might at any moment learn to perceive and utilize vibrations of all conceivable and inconceivable kinds. The question of magic is a question of discovering and employing hitherto unknown forces in nature. We know that they exist, and we cannot doubt the possibility of mental or physical instruments capable of bringing us into relation with them. 13. Every man is more or less aware that his individuality comprises several orders of existence, even when he maintains that his subtler principles are merely symptomatic of the changes in his gross vehicle. A similar order may be assumed to extend throughout nature. Illustration. One does not confuse the pain of a toothache with the decay that causes it. Inanimate objects are sensitive to certain physical forces, such as electrical and thermal conductivity, but neither in us nor in them, so far as we know, is there any direct conscious perception of these forces. Imperceptible influences are therefore associated with all material phenomena, and there is no reason why we should not work upon matter through these subtle energies as we do through their material bases. In fact, we use magnetic force to move iron and solar radiation to reproduce images. 14. Man is capable of being and using anything which he perceives, for everything which he perceives is a certain sense of a part of his being. He may thus subjugate the whole of the universe, of which he is conscious, to his individual will. Illustration. Man has used the idea of God to dictate his personal conduct, to obtain power over his followers, to excuse his crimes, and for innumerable other purposes, including that of realizing himself as God. He has used the irrational and unreal conceptions of mathematics to help him in the construction of mechanical devices. He has used his moral force to influence the actions of even wild animals. He has employed poetic genius for political purposes. 15. Every force in the universe is capable of being transformed into any other kind of force by using suitable means. There is thus an inexhaustible supply of any particular kind of force that we may need. Illustration. Heat may be transformed into light and power by using it to drive dynamos. The vibrations of the air may be used to kill men by so ordering them in speech as to inflame warlike passions. The hallucinations connected with the mysterious energies of sex result in the perpetuation of the species. Okay. 16. The application of any given force affects all the orders of being which exist in the object to which it is applied, whichever of those orders is directly affected. There's two ofs. Whichever of those orders is directly affected. Illustration. If I strike a man with a dagger, his consciousness, not his body only, is affected by my act, although the dagger, as such, has no direct relation therewith. Similarly, the power of my thought may so work on the mind of another person as to produce far-reaching physical changes in him, or in others through him. 17. A man may learn to use any force so as to serve any purpose by taking advantage of the above theorems. Illustration. A man may use a razor to make himself vigilant over his speech by using it to cut himself whenever he unguardedly utters a chosen word. He may serve the same purpose by resolving that every incident of his life shall remind him of a particular thing, making every impression the starting point of a connected series of thoughts ending in that thing. He might also devote his whole energies to some one particular object by resolving to do nothing at variance therewith, and to make every act turn to the advantage of that object. 18. He may attract himself to any force of the universe by making himself a fit receptacle for it and arranging conditions so that its nature compels it to flow toward him. Illustration. If I want pure water to drink, I dig a well in a place where there is underground water. I prevent it from leaking away, and I arrange to take advantage of water's accordance with the laws of hydrostatics to fill it. Naturally. 19. Man's sense of himself as separate from and opposed to the universe is a bar to conducting its currents. It insulates him. Illustration. A popular leader is most successful when he forgets himself and remembers only, quote-unquote, the cause. Self-seeking engenders jealousies and schism. When the organs of the body assert their presence, other by silent satisfaction, it is a sign they are diseased. The single exception is the organ of reproduction. Yet even in this case, its self-assertion bears witness to its dissatisfaction with itself, since it cannot fulfill its function until completed by its counterpart in another organism. Crowley, you wrong. 20. Man can only attract and employ the forces for which he is really fitted. Illustration. You cannot make a silk purse out of sow's ear. A true man of science learns from every phenomenon, but nature is dumb to the hypocrite, for in her there is nothing false. It is no objection that the hypocrite himself is part of nature. He is a quote-unquote endothermic product, divided against himself with a tendency to break up. He will see his own qualities everywhere, and thus obtain a radical misconception of phenomena. Most religions of the past have failed by expecting nature to conform with their ideals of proper conduct. 21. There is no limit to the extent of the relations of any man with the universe in essence. For as soon as a man makes himself one with any idea, the means of measurement cease to exist. But his power to utilize that force is limited by his mental power and capacity, and by the circumstances of his human environment. Illustration. When a man falls in love, the whole world becomes to him nothing but love boundless and imminent. But his mystical state is not contagious, and his fellow men are either amused or annoyed. He can only extend to others the effect which his love has had upon himself by means of his mental and physical qualities. Thus Catullus, Dante, and Swinburne made their love a mighty mover of mankind by virtue of their power to put their thoughts on the subject in musical and eloquent language. Again, Cleopatra and other people in authority molded the fortunes of many other people by allowing love to influence their political actions. The magician, however well he succeed in making contact with the secret sources of energy in nature, can only use them to the extent permitted by his intellectual and moral qualities. Mohammed's intercourse with Gabriel was only effective because of his statesmanship, soldiership, and the sublimity of his command of Arabic. Hertz's discovery of the rays which we now use for wireless telegraphy was sterile until it reflected through the minds and wills of people who could take his truth and transmit it to the world of action by means of mechanical and economic instruments. 22. Every individual is essentially sufficient to himself, but he's unsatisfactory to himself until he has established himself in his right relation with the universe. Illustration: a microscope, however perfect, is useless in the hands of savages. A poet, however sublime, must oppose himself upon his generation if he is to enjoy and even to understand himself, as theoretically should be the case. 23. Magic is the science of understanding oneself and one's conditions. It is the art of applying that understanding in action. Illustration: a golf club is intended to move a special ball in a special way in special circumstances. A niblick should rarely be used on the tee, or a brassy under the bank of a bunker. But also, the use of any club demands skill and experience. 24. Every man has an indefeasible right to be what he is. Illustration: to insist that anyone else should comply with one's own standards is to outrage not only him but oneself, since both parties are equally born of necessity. 25. Every man must do magic each time he acts or even thinks, since a thought is an internal act whose influence ultimately affects action, though it may not do so at the time. Illustration: the least gesture causes a change in a man's own body and the air around him. It disturbs the balance of the entire universe, and its effects continue eternally throughout all space. Every thought, however swiftly suppressed, has its effect on the mind. It stands as one of the causes of every subsequent thought and tends to influence every subsequent action. A golfer may lose a few yards on his drive, a few more with his second and third. He may lie on the green 6 bare inches too far from the hole. Hot. But the net result of these trifling mishaps is the difference between having and losing the hole. H-O-L-E, hole. 26. Every man has a right, the right of self-preservation, to fulfill himself to the utmost. Men of quote-unquote criminal nature are simply at issue with their true wills. The murderer has the will to live, and his will to murder is a false will at the variance with his true will, since he risks death at the hands of society by obeying his criminal impulse. Illustration: a function imperfectly performed injures not only itself but everything associated with it. If the heart is afraid to beat for fear of disturbing the liver is starved for blood and avenges itself on the heart by upsetting digestion, which disorders respiration, on which cardiac welfare depends. I really love this so much. 27. We're almost done. Every man should make magic the keystone of his life. He should learn its laws and live by them. Illustration: the banker should discover the real meaning of his existence, the real motive which led him to choose that profession. He should understand banking as a necessary factor in the economic existence of mankind, instead of merely a business whose objects are independent of the general welfare. He should learn to distinguish false values from real, and to not act on accidental fluctuations, but on considerations of essential importance. Such a banker will prove himself superior to others, because he will not be an individual limited by transitory things, but a force of nature, as impersonal, impartial, and eternal as gravitation, and as patient and irresistible as the tides. His system will not be subject to panic, any more than the laws of the inverse squares is disturbed by elections. He will not be anxious about his affairs because they will not be his, and for that reason he will be able to direct them with the calm, clear-headed confidence of an onlooker, with intelligence unclouded by self-interest, and power unimpaired by passion. 28. Final. Every man has a right to fulfill his own will without being afraid that it may interfere with that of others. For if he is in his proper place, it is the fault of others if they interfere with him. Illustration: if a man like Napoleon were actually appointed by destiny to control Europe, he should not be blamed for exercising his rights. To oppose him would be an error. Anyone doing so would have made a mistake as to his own destiny, except insofar as it might be necessary for him to learn the lessons of defeat. The sun moves in space without interference. The order of nature provides an orbit for each star. A clash proves that one or the other has strayed from its course. But as to each man that keeps his true course, the more firmly he acts, the less likely others are to get in his way. His example will help them to find their own paths and pursue them. Every man that becomes a magician helps others do likewise. The more firmly and surely men move, and the more such action is accepted as the standard of morality, the less conflict and confusion hamper humanity. I hope that the above principles will demonstrate to all that their welfare, their very existence, is bound up in magic. I trust that they will understand not only the reasonableness, but the necessity of the fundamental truth, which I was the means of giving to mankind. Quote, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Unquote. I trust that they will assert themselves as individually absolute, that they will grasp the fact that it is their right to assert themselves and to accomplish the task for which their nature fits them. Yea, more, that is their duty, and not only to themselves, but to others, a duty founded upon universal necessity, and not to be shirked on account of any casual circumstances of the moment, which may seem to put such conduct in the light of inconvenience, or even of cruelty. I hope that the principles outlined above will help them to understand this book and prevent them from being deterred from its study by the more or less technical language in which it is written. The essence of magic is simple enough in all conscience. It is not otherwise with the art of government. The aim is simply prosperity, but the theory is tangled, and the practice beset with briars. In the same way, magic is merely to be and to do. I should add, to suffer, for magic is the verb, and it is part of the training to use the passive voice. This is, however, a matter of initiation rather than of magic in its ordinary sense. It is not my fault if being is baffling and doing desperate. Oh my gosh, there's like so much more, but those are like the theorems and definitions, and now he's just like talking. But it's pretty funny if you want to read it. So that's been Crowley's Magic in Theory and Practice, Definitions and Theorems of Magic. For further study of the Magician card, thank you for joining me.